Good morning. It is Sunday. And it's not just any Sunday. We're just getting ready to get out of the holidays, get out of the spring, and jump into summer. I think most of the sexually transmitted diseases have already run their past as far as the spring break is concerned here in Florida, which is kind of nice. And I just got weaned off of matzah and back onto discount candy after Easter, and reminded myself that no matter what shape they make it, Reese's peanut butter shapes always look like turds. But I live with that. I live with so many other things we have to talk about today, including the fact we got to stop letting our vice president visit the Pope. Let's get into the rotation.
Yes, Gary, we definitely have to stop
letting the president go to funerals too, because he doesn't quite know which color of suit to wear.
Yeah, blue suit at a state funeral. Shocker there. Like, wow, what a guy, right?
He just wants
everybody knew who he was,
the
ferret on his head and all that, but I think they also know him from the blue suit as well. Anyways, good morning. My name is Gary Stein. I am the Southern Coast Normal Political Director and Master of Public Health. I don't know. I didn't hear the sound effect, so I have no idea.
We heard it.
It's coming in on my side. And along with me,
your stuff just doesn't work, Gary. That's like
our most adept engineer, Carlos Jose Angel Armida, and our Master of Business Administration.
Thank you very much.
And above him, of course, is our Executive Director, our Master of Public Administration, and the trio in the top of the trio of our Masters of Cannabis, Christopher Cano.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Chris, you're over in DC right now. How was the weather over there?
It is a little windy, a little bit chilly. We're in that false summer period, if you will. The spring weather is still around. It rained a little bit last couple of days, but as far as the actual atmosphere in DC, it is tense. There is a lot to be said around the federal workforce and how things are shaking out, and this the Trump administration itself definitely has some folks concerned. I'll obviously jump in deeper into the news, but a U.S. attorney on Friday warned a locally approved medical marijuana dispensary about potential violations of federal law and suggested they could face prosecution by the Trump administration's Justice Department. They're actually located in Washington, D.C. So that is definitely a concern that Pam Bondi's Justice Department and Donald Trump's Justice Department will be cracking down on legal dispensaries in the Washington, D.C. area.
Well, I should note that during the last administration, I did manage to light up on K Street and several other locations in D.C. on the mall, and no one stopped me, even though those were federal lands. So I guess things are starting to change as far as that. Is there a chilling effect going on?
A lot of folks here are like I said, they're unsure of how things are shaking out. The Trump administration itself has sent mixed signals in regards to how it feels about cannabis. I would say this much: if we do get any type of progress from this administration, it will not be people-centered progress. And I say that because if you look at True Leaf and Cure Leaf together have put $1 million into the Trump inaugural slush fund. And so that's a major concern when you see big cannabis stepping up, and they're the voices in the room rather than like we saw with the previous administration, where Vice President Harris sat down with members of NORML to talk about pardons and talk about where we go from here. And I'm not entirely sure we're going to have that same type of access with this current administration. It's going to be big cannabis. It's not going to be NORML.
What's that guy, the High at 9 news guy?
Jason Beck from California. Yeah.
I'm wondering what people like Jason Beck, who are like, Trump is the cannabis politician. He's the reason why we're going to be able to legalize. I wonder how they're justifying that bullshit. Maybe I should watch the High.
Well, here's the clue. You have to be in a certain bubble, so to speak, which is your basic own private Idaho, where the reality is only what you said.
Idaho.
Well, I just want to
I've
say that
never heard that
I know
before. That
Jason.
really is disgusting.
I know Jason personally, and I would say this much: the persona and how he is in reporting the news is very objective. But people have their own personal views and how they feel about it, and sometimes those things don't always reconcile. Being a cannabis advocate and your personal politics, for a lot of us, it is a personal thing because we've been affected directly by the criminal justice system, by federal policy, by state policies of prohibition. And we feel, our politics are not disconnected from our activism. For other folks, they have the luxury that their political views can have this disconnect from their activism. And we see that from some of our biggest friends and allies in this sector. And, more and more, I'm of the opinion that you can't disconnect your politics from your activism. But that kind of is a great segue into our guest today, who I do want to introduce, is Catherine Hiller, who's an acclaimed author and wrote Just Say Yes, a Marijuana. Catherine, welcome, and thanks for jumping in the rotation with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
So, Catherine, just first question: what was your journey into, just cannabis activism? And for some people, activism isn't always being on the front lines of a picket or lobbying members, but it's also like you do, writing and writing. James Baldwin would tell you that that's definitely a revolutionary act in a lot of ways. So, what brought you into this space?
Well, I am a writer and I am a cannabis user. Very enthusiastic, and since I was about 17. So when I wrote the first book, this is actually the same book, but this is the edition that came out 10 years ago of Just Say Yes, a Marijuana Memoir. It got a lot of attention because things were so different 10 years ago. In my state, New York State, it was still illegal. So although at that point, you could only get a fine, some people I knew when I came out with this book said, "Aren't you frightened of going to jail? And oh my God, what's going to happen to your life?" And I had to laugh at them, saying, no, it's not like that. But I was writing to take the stigma out of marijuana use. And I know now I have to call it cannabis. Okay, out of cannabis use. And I really wanted to present myself as not this like stoned person in a basement, but as, a responsible member of society, own a house, pay a mortgage, pay my taxes, 3 children. In many ways, I'm pretty mainstream. So I thought that having a mainstream person like myself come out and be completely honest about her cannabis use would really add to the conversation. And it did, in fact. The first book with the orange cover, Just Say Yes, created quite a stir. And the New York Times really helped me. They published in their opinion section the first chapter, which was called How I Buy Weed. And it discussed, the kind of familiar journey many of us have had, where you have your one dealer, you've been dealing with him for decades, and you go up the stairs and you get into his ratty apartment. And, the question is not like what kind you want. It's just how much. I have this kind. You want an ounce? You want half an ounce? And some people there, when I would make my pilgrimage, would be buying pounds and half pounds. So they were the dealers. But I was just a suburban mom, coming for my supply. And the New York Times and when this chapter was published, there was a lot of other interest in the book and in me as this outspoken cannabis user. And that was great. I was really glad. Yeah.
Catherine, so I understand the latest version of the book has a foreword written by Steve D'Angelo, or is that left over from the first bit?
No. So after 10 years, my publisher decided to come out with this other book. Now, 10 years earlier, the media was sort of fascinated by my statement that I'd smoked pot every day for 50 years, except when I was pregnant. Now it's 60 years because I'm 78. And it's just a longer history and a longer amount of time with this. Now, Steve D'Angelo, obviously, he's one of my heroes. He is,
Us
such a,
too. We love the D'Angelos. We've actually interviewed his brother, and
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah.
me and Chris did an episode of this podcast when it first came out at one of his events.
Uh-huh.
So we're big fans of D'Angelo. I just want to go back to the 50, 60 year thing. I think you've actually smoked weed longer than Gary has smoked weed. So I'm very excited to,
Because I'm probably older than he is. That's why.
Slightly. Tomorrow I'm going to be 67. Not the number of the
Oh,
beast.
that's a lot younger. Come on, 11
You-
years.
you said
A
tomorrow.
I
Tomorrow.
probably will, yes. But
Well, anyway,
yeah.
happy birthday.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Happy
I'm 67.
birthday to
That's
you.
the number
Happy
of the beast.
birthday to you. Happy
And,
birthday.
Happy
I'll
birthday,
go on from
Gary.
there. But Catherine, I just wanted to mention the fact that your background as a writer was slightly different than some of the other people whose liturgy is in the I'd say more mainstream frame. You were closer to being like the modern day Anais Nin.
Oh, I hope so.
And-
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you found that. Nobody else
And I-
has, but you've seen into my soul.
Well, I mean, she had a different situation. She in France at that particular
Completely
point in time. She wrote to a certain audience.
Mhm.
I don't think she ever expected to be widely spread, although she was very, very prolific in her erotica and all the other things that she wrote.
Well, that's the big connection because, a theme of my writing, I've always been fueled by passion. So I write nonfiction, like Just Say Yes, and I have a Substack called The Pleasure Principle. But my heart is in my novels, and my novels have often been sexually fueled, because I do think that sex is this fantastic and subversive force that when it enters a life, you just don't know what's going to happen. And I'm very interested in that kind of book.
Well,
I wanted to chime in real quick.
Whether or not cannabis was actually a connection in there as far as the erotica is concerned.
Yeah, that is a great question, Gary. Tell us more about how does cannabis connect with sexuality in your view, and does it? Because in my view, it improves it. The first time I got high and then had sex, I was like, we should do it like this every time.
Well, those two subjects, sex and cannabis, are both extremely personal and vary on an individual level. And I don't think we'll ever find a drug that has so much variation in its effects on the user in terms of both quantity, like some people will just get unbelievably out of their heads with, half a gram, and other people can ingest huge quantities and feel not one thing. So there's that. And plus, as we know, many people who smoke cannabis don't like it at all. That makes them anxious. It makes them worried. They don't like it. So there's that. With sexuality, it's another huge variety of the way we all respond to certain touches, certain situations, certain people. So if you combine those two together, you're going to find a great variety of response. Many people feel the way you do, that it really does improve things. And I do think for certain aspects of sex, well, you know how it is. It makes you hungrier and you like things in your mouth. And so for me, kissing is just great when you're stoned, right? But I find that when, getting into more, let's say, deeper sexuality, this is just for me. I'm not saying for everybody. And I don't even know why I'm telling anybody this, but for me, it doesn't improve things. It makes me a little more self-conscious, pulling away from what's going on and maybe even my partner. So yes, for kissing, not for other things. For me, other people love it, and that's great.
Awesome. One of the things that as the author, you've seen based on, the time of your career, how technology has changed. And, like you just said, you have a Substack, you have the Pleasure Principle. How do you feel as though, does that type of medium give you more opportunity to get your thoughts out versus an actual novel or a memoir? I'm just curious to know the different writing mediums. Like, how do you like Substack, and how does that match up with like you said, publishing a book?
Well, Substack is much more immediate, and you get feedback from your listeners, in the comments, and they can comment to each other. So that's all, very refreshing, very nice. It's great not to have an editor and to just, occasionally a misspelling will come in there or whatever. People understand that about Substack. Substack, for those of you who don't know in the audience, is a network. It's a facilitation of writing. And you could go on Substack and publish as much or as little as you want. The problem, as in any art form, is finding your audience. And, there's some vast audiences for some Substackers. The most popular Substacker may be Heather Cox Richardson. I think she's got 7 million people subscribing. And what she does, she's a historian. She writes every single day a very long essay about what's going on in our country today and linking it to history. So she is a brilliant resource. I do not have 7 million followers, but what I love to do is each week write on some aspect of pleasure. And because I think pleasure is more available to all of us than certain other things like, say, fulfillment or happiness or riches. You can't always get those. Can you get pleasure? Yeah, you can. You can decide what gives you joy and you can bring it into your life more. And of course, anybody who reads my Substack knows that pleasure is far more than sexual pleasure. There's all kinds of sensual pleasures that one can incorporate into your life, whether it's a single flower on your toilet tank. So every time you go in there, you get a little flower. It's part of your peeing experience. Or, something as idiosyncratic as some people love to fold clothes. They get a real sense of the order, what they have, what they like, and so on. And I, wrote about that too. What I'm writing about this week, which will be available on Tuesday, if I can manage to do it, is a very interesting pleasure, which I bet none of you have thought about. This is about parking. And I do something called sport parking. When it's almost impossible to get in there, that's when I do my best parking. I have recently parked where there were like 6 inches in front of me, 9 inches in back of me. And it was so brilliant. I had to take a photograph of it. So I'm going to write about parking. Is this a pleasure? Maybe. Maybe you could consider it a pleasure. I don't know. But I'm having so much fun with this, right?
Well, that's one benefit, I guess, to having a platform. Every writer has to have some kind of platform. And that usually means getting involved in some imprint somewhere that'll allow you to go ahead and take your written word and disseminate it. You had a heliotrope,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. My wife was writing erotica. She was working with a Zebra at one point in time, which doesn't have the widest distribution.
Well,
So here with
Heliotrope
Substack,
is a wonderful indie press, but all indie presses have a problem with marketing, And so I don't know. I feel that my books with Heliotrope, I am so devoted to Naomi. She's such a wonderful publisher, and she's so good to her writers, and it's really great. But to make your book stand out, in this noise, when every year, if you include self-publishing, there are 1 million new books. That's, it's really hard to make yourself known and heard.
Well, that's what I've noticed is that we have issue in regards to, again, with distribution is concerned. Most people are going to self-publishing through Amazon. Carlos has a book on Amazon. My book, which has been sitting on the shelf now for a couple of years because I couldn't find an imprint and I wasn't certain I wanted to go self-publishing. I mean, that's what a lot of writers have to deal with, and we all want a voice, and you want to use your voice, again, not only for the erotica, but also your life story and your advocacy.
True. But also, I just want to remind people that I am a maker of things, and the things I make are novels. And so that is where I think my most entertaining books are. But maybe that's because I like to read novels so much, When I read a nonfiction book, I'm so excited with myself and I pat myself on the back. You're doing a good thing. You're learning real things you hear. But, you go to novels for something else, some deep exploration. And a lot of Just Say Yes is written in sort of chapters, which are like chapters of a book, which tell you the immediate thing that's going on. But what's unusual about this book, both as nonfiction as fiction, is that it goes backwards in time. So it starts with me now, and the next chapter is of me, say, 5 years ago, and then another chapter will be when the book came out 10 years ago, and so on. So the very last chapter is I'm a child, and I'm spinning around to get dizzy because I love that feeling of being out of my mind, and I do connect that to my, my lifelong love of marijuana.
That goes into the question I wanted to ask you earlier. I believe 60 years of smoking marijuana. That's a long fucking time, man. Do you recall the first time you smoked weed?
Of course I do.
That's
Everybody knows the first time they got high. And
Yeah.
one reason why they remember it is it will never be as good again. So we're all searching for that wonderful golden experience and hoping we can get it back. But there's only one first time. And my first time was well prepared for by me because from having read, doing a lot of reading as a senior in high school, actually my whole life. So everything I read told me that this was my drug. This was going to be my thing. I just knew it. I didn't have to do it. I knew it. And so the problem was I didn't know how to smoke cigarettes. So I prepared myself. I said, someday soon, I'm going to get a chance to smoke pot, but I better learn how to smoke cigarettes. So I was a counselor that summer, and like homework, I would smoke a cigarette before going to bed and, get the feeling of it, get it in my lungs. And, cigarettes could get you pretty buzzed yourself your first time. So I was kind of reeling into bed. And when in the fall, I got a boyfriend, and surprise, surprise, he had some joints. I was completely there. I was so willing and eager. And we went to Prospect Park. I was living in Brooklyn, and we smoked. I was prepared. I knew how to get it down. I knew how to hold it down. And we had a great time.
So how did your life journey go from fiction and erotica, and then some nonfiction, and then into advocacy, as kind of an undercurrent that was there all along and then it surfaced?
Well, many writers think that they could write a memoir, and I was of an age where that was perfectly logical. But I really wanted this memoir to be a different kind of memoir and to have a subject focus. And that would make it more interesting because, as a novelist, I'd written some books and so on. It didn't seem to me that was any reason to write a memoir. Woman wrote books, doesn't seem so. But I thought if I presented my life through this marijuana lens, that it would include actually a surprising lot of my life, because so much of my life has been influenced one way or another through my, habit, which it is a habit. I would never deny it. Of course, it's a habit. So I decided to focus on that. And as I was writing it, I became more of an advocate. But, writers, once they start writing things, it stiffens their own beliefs. You, in some ways, don't know quite what you feel about something till you've written about it. So I did write that book. And I was thrilled that Naomi wanted to Rosenblatt. And we're such good friends at this point. This is the fourth book of mine she's published, counting the other book. She published 2 novels in the middle. And the one that came out immediately after the original, Just Say Yes, was called The Feud. And in some ways it was similar. It extended the theme because it was a feud between 2 women in the workplace. And one of them drank a fair amount of wine and would go home and, get sozzled. And the other one was a pot smoker. And so along with the sort of very plot-driven novel about how one of them, they're trying to destroy each other at the end. I mean, they're really vicious in a way that shocked some of my male friends. They had no idea women could be that way. None of the women friends were shocked at all. But, men really think of women as like the gentler sex. And in many ways we are, but not in this book. So I thought that was an interesting contrast because the person who smokes weed, which of course is the one I identified with, is going to be a very different kind of person from the person who drinks a lot of wine. And I wanted to get that in this book too.
After
Now,
seeing my wife give birth, I know for a fact that we men are the more fragile sex, regardless of what society has conditioned us to be. Just the fact that of seeing her help. My son is now 10 and a half months old, and seeing her raise him, and just everything that she goes through on a daily basis. I know for a fact that I am too neurologically fragile to be as successful as she's been. So yes, Catherine, by all means, all props to the ladies for holding down society and not getting the credit they deserve.
But let me tell you one thing. I have a son who has two kids. I have three sons, but one of them has this little family of, and the little girl is 4, and the baby is 1. And I really think that he does about 60% of the child care and nurturing in that home. Whenever I speak to him, he's got a baby on one hip and another one is foot. And they just like, I see my grandkids. I just have to call him. He's there with them. So this is something that some men really love and cotton on to and really do very, very well. I have another son in California who has a 7-year-old girl. Again, he just loves her and he raises her and he does at least half of the work. So I do think things have really changed dramatically since when I was a young mom. And, we had the most traditional of marriages.
Well, Carlos, by all means, go ahead. But I just wanted to get out real quick, Catherine. Society has changed drastically, like you said, since you've been a mom. So, where do you posit, has the anxiety behind being a cannabis user dissipated because of the progress we've made in public policy, or is it still the same level of anxiety that folks have around being a cannabis user, at least from your point of view, from being a suburban mama, as you put it?
Well, people have asked me this question in a different way, which I think is really funny. The way they ask, am I getting less pleasure from it because I'm no longer breaking the law? No. I'm so glad that laws have been liberalized. I'm so happy. So much less anxiety. Even, when streets of New York, I used to, frankly, take risks and smoke pot in the street. Now I smoke pot in the street and I'm not taking a risk. Is it better? Absolutely. I'm really happy for what's going on. And I hope there'll be, federal legalization so that, make everything so much easier for dispensaries and so on. So yeah, things have changed and they're changing quickly, but not quickly enough. And there, you mentioned Steve D'Angelo. He has an organization, I think it's called The Last Prisoner, something like that.
Last Prisoner Project, yes.
Yes, The Last Prisoner Project, because there are still many, many people in prison for low-level cannabis dealing and so on, or sometimes even paraphernalia. So Steve D'Angelo, being this great advocate that he is, as well as a great entrepreneur, has made it his business to get, these people some justice.
Now, you mentioned, and I'm sorry I have to address this, but this came up in your lifetime, so that you were writing from a point of privilege. Now, you're looking at 3 guys here who at one point in time have all been pulled over regardless of how light our skin is. Even though these guys are somewhat on the brown side because they have even background.
No. The way I'm looking at them, not brown. They're not part of what they call it, the world human majority or something. There is this term that's going on, and there was a literary magazine, and they were only accepting pieces from the world human majority, which I guess doesn't mean me.
Now, if you ever get involved with a white nationalist, you can talk to them about the fact that there's so much intermingling right now that within a century we'll all be beige.
Yeah, and that may be true. I think that, if you look around, I used to think how hilarious every television ad had a mixed race couple in it. And, if you're looking at television, which not that many people do anymore, but on the commercials, it's certainly true. But then I look around me at events. It's also true. It's definitely a lot more, whether it's a beautiful Indian woman and, an Irish guy from the Bronx. These are one neighbors on one side. And, of course. And will we all become beige? Maybe, but they'll be the most wonderful genetic mixtures, black faces with blue eyes, blondes on, there's all kinds. It's a whole new world. But yes, I think that there will be a lot more mixing.
The Republican Party.
Yeah.
You even got a brown guy running the Proud Boys.
I know. Well, skin color doesn't guarantee
All
virtue.
right, let's get away from skin color for just a moment. Um,
I think you were talking about my privilege as a user, and I want to go back to that because
Something that we don't always deal with, because of the fact that we had less chance of being arrested for smoking on the street as much as somebody of color.
yeah, absolutely. And your chances, even to this day, of being incarcerated are about 3.5 times as much as a black person, a person of color. I'm trying to not offend anybody, but has a much larger chance of ending up in jail, like a 3.5 time chance than a white person.
Well, if you guys don't mind, I'd like to go back to the book for a moment. And I honestly would just, God damn it, Gary.
Did I derail your train for a second there?
We got to get your audio fixed, dude. Jesus Christ. Anyways, Catherine, please. So have you ever seen the movie Half Baked?
I don't think so. Say it again.
Oh, Half Baked. It's a Dave Chappelle.
Oh, Half Baked.
Yeah.
No, I have not.
So in this movie, and we were talking about earlier that everybody who consumes cannabis is a little different. In this movie, they segment out all the different stoners. There's like different demographics of stoners that they segment out. Personally, I would call myself an everyday dabber. But that wasn't around when the movie came out. There was like an after school smoker, and there was a daily user, and there was like Ken, help me out. There's other
the enhancement smoker who thinks weed makes everything better. There's the scavenger smoker. There's the guy who never has his own. He always wants to hit your joint.
So my question to you is, where do you fit in? What and how has that changed over the years? Can you see that in the book?
Yes, to some degree, although you don't get a forward motion. Remember, I'm going backward in the book. Has it changed over the years? Not that much. I come to I guess I've been smoking a couple of times a day for all this long time, and I still do. There are 2 really important times for me to smoke. But I'll also smoke other times. I'm not stingy with my usage.
What are those 2 times?
Okay. When I sit down to write, it absolutely loosens me up and it makes me feel really confident. And I know I've got important things to say and that people are ready to listen to it. That's when I'm stoned, okay? Is the actual product any different? No, I don't really think so. And I actually have some evidence because, the 3 times I was pregnant with my sons, I didn't smoke, but I was still writing. Those books are no different from the books that I wrote stoned. But it was easier to write them stoned because the whole time, that I sort of got into the writing part, the original, first draft part is like, I'm thinking I'm great. I'm not having the doubts, the hesitations. Maybe I didn't mean this. Maybe this is to this. No, I'm just, floating along and feeling, happy and confident and feeling I have a voice and people want to listen. So it's really helpful for me for writing. I wouldn't say it for everybody. I'm never going to say what I do, others should do. And maybe I shouldn't, not just about pop, but in general. Maybe that's a good idea, just to let people find their own way.
But still, I appreciate you coming and writing a whole book about how cannabis kind of has either helped or I understand you're very objective about it. Like you if it's harmed you in some way, you write about it in your book, right?
Yeah, I do. I really tried to lay it all out as it was for my truth. So yes, I have a chapter. Is it bad for you? I have a chapter. Are you addicted? I have a chapter, coming out to your kids, coming out to your doctor. I really try to answer the hard questions in my life because I think they're interesting questions.
So are you addicted?
Oh, yeah. Of course I am. Does it mean, listen, let me that now say, it's another word. My husband's addicted to orange juice. If he doesn't have it in the morning, he's just in a terrible mood. And why isn't there? So, I feel I certainly have a habit. Can I do without it? Yes. When we go on vacations, I usually don't bring it. And I give myself, a pot vacation as well as, say, a vacation in Switzerland or whatever. I do
Addiction.
think it's important for me to do this a couple of times a year to remind myself that it's not a severe physical addiction. I can do without it. When I do without it, I have the most wonderful dreams, so long and intense. But, I think that that's just because most pot smokers are finding there's a kind of diminution of their dreams, or they don't remember it, or they're not as important. So, when I do take a little break from smoking pot, yeah, I have great dreams. But, pot smoking, dreams, I think cannabis is more important.
Addiction
Well,
can
I
be
can attest to that. I can attest to that. Carlos, Gary both know, I was arrested on felony charges, getting my dad medical marijuana while he was going
Oh,
through
no.
suffering through dementia. And that's what led me to team up with Carlos and Gary to found this chapter of Normal in Central Florida. And what really struck me was when I was court ordered to go to rehab and I couldn't smoke for over 10 months, the intensity of the dreams and how they hit me. And then it gave me the revelation. Then I understood why a lot of veterans and people who have post-traumatic stress disorder do utilize cannabis, because it does help stifle a lot of the subconscious anxiety and bad experiences that do tend to come up while you're consciously asleep. And the intensity of the dreams, which I have to co-sign what you're saying, Catherine. Absolutely. When you're sober and you don't have any cannabis in your system, your dreams are pretty intense. But also, I realized that cannabis is a social lubricant in a lot of ways for me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when I was sober, Carlos can attest to this, I was a much more crotchety person. I mean, we would argue over the letter I. It's just simple stuff that just normally I would let go or I wouldn't harp on. But I was definitely someone who was much more assertive when I was sober, and I didn't let as much things slide, and I wasn't as what's the word? I wouldn't negotiate. I wasn't as diplomatic. When I'm sober, I'm bordering on an asshole. Is the English word I guess I could use.
I would just
And Carlos is laughing.
You're just more easygoing when you're smoking.
Yeah, I think that's true. And as a social lubricant, perhaps when it was more illegal, it was a little bit more like of a secret code. I do it, you do it. Shh, let's go do it out back. So that's changed a lot. Obviously people aren't doing it out back anymore. I want to go back to what you were saying about helping your dad with dementia. Could you go into that a little bit? Because, people I know are already, experiencing some dementia. A good friend of mine, for instance, I just can't believe it so quickly. So how does cannabis work with a person who has some dementia?
So when my dad was diagnosed, they told him, you have maybe 6 months, and he lasted 7 years. It was obviously the level of care that my mom could get him. In Florida, when he was diagnosed in 2010, there was no medical marijuana system. And even in 2014, we tried to get it passed, and the amendment failed. We got it passed in 2016. They didn't even, the legislature debated on implementing it. So people didn't even start getting access to medical marijuana until the fall of 2017. And my dad, passed away in January 2017. So he never even got to take advantage of the legal system. So going to the legacy market was the challenge. Finding it in the quantities necessary. I didn't even understand how to prepare concentrates until I met Carlos, and he educated me on how do you make a tincture from flour, and how you can make oil using a magical butter machine, which was brand new on the market at the time. But what I did see is that my dad had lost the ability to speak, and his first dose of RSO, after having not spoken for about 18 months, he started making words again. And so what I saw was it also calmed him down. He wasn't as agitated. When you have someone with dementia and they're bedbound and you're trying to give them medicine or wash them or change them, they'll fight you at times. And I do know that he had manic states that were difficult at times when he was still ambulatory. So oftentimes getting someone with that dementia to sit down, to calm down, and even to see that there is some type of neurological effect that seems to be positive is great. But what really struck me was in my research of why I turned to cannabis for my dad was that I discovered the Department of Health and Human Services has had a patent on utilizing cannabis to stop oxidative diseases since 2003. So the federal government has known this, and they've still allowed prohibition to continue. And it just stinks to high heaven of both corruption and the profit motive behind cannabis, because you see that there is a large pharmaceutical lobby in this country that wants to keep it illegal until they can corner the market. And then now you have big cannabis playing into it. There are multi-state operators that want to corner the market on all cannabinoids. They want to put hemp businesses out of business. They want tough on crime policies for legacy market dealers. They want folks in New York who have pop-up shops to get arrested, to get raided, to get saddled with tax bills that they can never pay. And all that plays into the pay-to-play political system we have.
Yeah. No, this is very transactional administration here. I just think it's hilarious. I didn't know before that big cannabis contributed to the inauguration, but I am not surprised.
Yeah, True Leaf gave $750,000 and Curaleaf gave $250,000. That's $1 million from two of the
right.
biggest.
And you did $1 million. Nice round number. Crazy. Yeah, terrible.
Well,
I was actually at a concert and somebody gave me a petition for the new True Leaf recreational thing, and I said, "Yeah, I'll take 2 of those petitions. So I can sign them right here for you." Okay. I said, "Yeah, no problem."
So we had our launch party for this book, The New Thing, at a dispensary. So this was a terrific event. I think some people might have come for the book. Some people might have come for the free pre-rolls. We just never figured it out. But
that's a great book party. Absolutely.
I'm showing up
at that event. Wow.
Yep. We couldn't smoke right in the dispensary, but right outside there were tables and ashtrays. So there was a lot of, mingling around. And then, as in many literary events these days, it's not so much a reading, because we've sort of crossed some cultural line where people are actually more interested in the author than in the book. It used to be the book was the thing of interest, and at a reading, you would get the author reading it, 20, 25 minutes. Now you're lucky if they read a page or two. It's all the Q&A. What did you do? How did you write it? What about your family? What about your... And okay, if this is where the culture is going, I'm fine with it. But I did insist on reading just one chapter, a chapter that Jamie Lubin recommended I read. It was about trying to get my mom high. Because my mom and I were very, very close. And I thought, I'm doing this great thing. She should do it too. Didn't quite work out that way.
It didn't work out.
A long history of writers who are inspired by cannabis or use cannabis to find their niche. Famously, back in the 1800s, the Breakfast Club in France, which included writers, including Dumas and things of that sort, who would just sit there and stay in a bed and breakfast, essentially, and just smoke to get inspired.
Well, there were the hashishin in the late 19th century in France. And, people like Rimbaud would get inspired. More recently, there is the American author who lived in Morocco, Paul Bowles. And Paul Bowles wrote The Sheltering Sky and some other very strange, forbidden, really original books. And on learning that he was, he wrote his most brilliant scene after being high on majoun, which is a kind of marijuana candy that he ate. And so a friend of mine and I went to Morocco and we produced a documentary film about him. And one of my reasons was I was just fascinated by this brilliant author who admitted to, daily use. So, and he was a very, at the time, he's dead now, but he was about 80 or 85, an impeccably dressed man with the most beautiful clothes and overcoat and so on. I mean, he just looked just so unstony. He was like the complete opposite of what you'd expect to find. And so it was both his talent and his use of hashish and so on they don't call it, they do some special thing, keef, which is a little different, but basically the same kind of effect was what he was smoking. So I was, drawn to that aspect of him, and it married my two interests, literature and marijuana. So it was a natural.
Well, we were just touching about authors, and I just want to throw out there, so often they leave a lot of historical facts out when we learn about people in school. They won't tell you that Shakespeare smoked cannabis. They won't tell you Ernest Hemingway smoked cannabis when you learn about these authors and in the indoctrinated curriculum that we get in the K through 12 system. But I want to go back to what you talked about trying to get your mom to smoke, because for me, one of my fondest memories while my family was still intact was a Christmas outside in my grandmother's backyard, smoking with her, my dad, and myself, just having 3 generations pass around a joint. And for her to tell me stories like, I was like, are you gonna roll that up? And she's like, yeah. Here I am bringing a cone because I'm not a good roller. She's like, you come from a long family of cigar rollers, you should know how to roll. Shame on you. So she's giving me smack about not speaking Spanish. She's giving me smack about not being able to roll. And she's like, I've been rolling joints longer than you've been alive. Just that happy memory of just that camaraderie of being with family, around the holidays is something I will never forget. And I just, Catherine, what about your experience with your own family? I know your mom, but how has it been with you and like your sons? Have y'all ever had the opportunity to get in a rotation together?
Frequently. Then, of course we do. As soon as I knew they were smoking with their friends and they were over 18, why would I hesitate? I didn't want to introduce them to it, but it was part of their youth culture. And, I was really happy when came a chance we could do it. They're not really as interested in cannabis as I am. They sometimes, to my horror, they drink alcohol, bourbon. I mean, things I don't know anything about. Every person's different. Every generation is different. It's certainly no big deal for them. And they're certainly, they're mildly amused that their mom is now, this public cannabis advocate. Maybe they're a little embarrassed. I don't know, but they're very friendly about it. I'm really lucky. I have, very wonderful men as my children. And, I admire them in many ways. We have long literary discussions. I love it that they're wonderful fathers. So I'm lucky that way. And I think that cannabis has made us all a little looser.
Awesome. Catherine, we're coming up to the top of the hour here, and we appreciate you taking your time on a Sunday to be with us. So I'm going to give Gary and Carlos each an opportunity to get one more question in before we move on to the news. So, Carlos, go ahead, brother.
Oh, okay. So Catherine, I got a question I've been dying to ask you about New York. You've lived in New York your entire life, huh?
Yes and no.
Yes and
it
no?
Depends what you mean by New York. I mean, when I was young, New York only meant Manhattan. And I lived there till I was 11 in Greenwich Village, and it was a great time to be there. Then we moved to a place called Brooklyn, and we moved to a place called Park Slope that no one had heard about. And my mom was sort of reassuring her friends, said, it's just behind Brooklyn Heights, which it really isn't. But people had sort of heard of Brooklyn Heights. Park Slope was like a completely foreign idea, even though it is to this day a neighborhood of beautiful brownstones.
How has New York City really changed towards, so right now, essentially, like people, there are people like prohibitionists that are using New York City as an example, where it's like, it smells like weed everywhere.
It doesn't.
No. They're prohibitionists. They're trying to fucking bullshit us. But the truth is now it's pretty free. Like you even mentioned earlier in the podcast that you're able to smoke out in public at this point. But New York City was also it was alive during the stop and frisk days. So and I even visited at one point. I had a friend that just got stopped on the subway just out of the blue and searched. And that has been that was a horrible time for marijuana consumers. So how has marijuana changed in New York City? When were things starting to get more free? And Were you affected?
No, I look so kind of inoffensive. I'm a woman. I'm a middle class woman. No one would think to stop me and shake me down or search me. That hasn't changed at all. In fact, I'm going to tell you a story, which I look back on it, and it is in my book. I look back at it with just amazement. The children were young, and they were in the back seat. So when I say young, maybe they were like 12, 7, and 2, 5 years apart. We had just stopped to the dealer, the dealer, our long-term dealer, and we're getting ready to go away for the summer. So we had several ounces. There we were with our kids, several ounces. And what do we decide to do after visiting the dealer on the Lower East Side? Let's see what kind of pot we're going to be smoking all summer. And we roll up a joint and we light it. And then I suddenly hear this voice coming from my right and high. And I look up, and there is this unmarked van, and there's a policeman looking down and saying, "Put out that joint." Oh my God. Of course I put it out. And I'm waiting to see what's going to happen. We're going to get arrested with all this pot with us and our kids, and we're smoking in the car. Will the kids get taken away from us? All of which could have happened, by the way, if I were a Black woman of like 23. But no, you know what happened? After put out that joint,
What?
Car pulls away and goes somewhere else. He doesn't care. So that was an amazing life lesson to me to be learned. If you asked about my privilege, that was an example of my privilege. He just moved away.
Interesting.
Carlos definitely resonates to that Chappelle skit where he talks about, sorry, I didn't know I couldn't do that, officer. And that's the end of the story.
Right. Is it illegal?
I had a similar situation. I was in the Upper West Side, and I was in a neighborhood that happened to be filled with minorities. I'm walking out of this building, and I'm walking out of the building with this Black dude. And the cop sees us and he's just, "Oh, these guys are exactly where it belongs." There was a Jewish guy with us. He was just like 5 steps behind us. As soon as they saw him walk out of that same building, they're like, "Whoa, this guy doesn't belong here," and stopped him, frisked him, and everything. So I mean, it could work both ways. You know what I mean? Like when I wasn't in New York City, but one of the times I got arrested, I was a Spanish guy getting stopped in a Black neighborhood in Miami. So I mean, it could work. I understand your privilege and everything, but if you're in a different neighborhood, you could get stopped. You could be like,
I'm not saying I've got a jail, get out of jail free card. I was just astonished and shaking. I mean, that was a very disturbing incident.
Yeah.
How long do you think
we're more careful after that?
How long do you think before the Trump administration starts selling get out of jail free cards for $5 million? Right?
And they've already, they're doing that. It's beyond the imagination. I do think I've got a good imagination. That's why I write novels. But honestly, every day I woke up and what? He could do what? It's astonishing. If it weren't so frightening, it would be entertaining. But it really is too frightening.
Yeah. Gary, what's your final question for Catherine? Oh, you got to unmute, brother. You hit the mute button. It happens.
I can't unmute him.
Gary, you still got your computer muted.
He can't hear us. That's why he cuts everybody off during the show, because he just can't.
Okay, that's what it is.
Oh,
so
he's laughing.
And he's going hard. And we don't even know. That's too funny. That is too funny.
That's the thing. When he's got something to say, there's just no stopping him. He can't hear.
I just sent him a message in the chat. Maybe he can see it.
Oh, there he's like, oh,
he looks like he's trying
to. Oh, wait.
Nope. He's still talking.
It looks like he's having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah, maybe. There he got it.
I was on mute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, when I was working for the CDC, I was stationed in Fort Apache and Fort Greene. We were out tracking syphilis and HIV, which was a lot of fun. But we did manage to get out to Manhattan at least once or twice. I remember in Lafayette Park, there were guys rolling loose J's on the trunks of their cars. And I was just saying, my goodness, look at this out in the open. It almost had a Ann Arbor vibe to it. Because back in the day when I was going to Michigan State, of course, Ann Arbor had the $25 fine if you got caught, which was so nice. I was saying, well, at least the biggest city in the world kind of gets it. I don't know. Was I wrong at that point in time? Did they get it at that time?
Well, yes and no. $25 in that time would be more like $200 today. So it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was like, oh, really? Okay, I got to find out how I can raise this money.
And now Kano's mute.
Well, Catherine, we that's a great point, and we appreciate.
We are semi-professionals. Don't start this at home.
Indeed, we are super semi. Semi is the key word. Catherine, we appreciate you joining us today in the rotation, and we just want to give you the floor to tell folks how they can follow you, tell us where they can find your books, and maybe share with us what you got coming up next. And Carlos, if you want to make the screen big so folks can hear Catherine out.
Okay, great. Let's see what were those questions?
Just where folks can follow you,
okay.
Obviously.
You can find this, listen, on Amazon, but you have to write Just Say Yes 10th Anniversary Edition. You have to see the green cover. If you just write Just Say Yes by Catherine Hiller, you're going to get the old book, which is perfectly fine, but it's missing the 9 new chapters and the introduction by Steve D'Angelo. So on Amazon, it's Just Say Yes 10th edition. Gosh, on Instagram, I'm Catherine.Hiller.1. On Facebook, I think Catherine Hiller author will just get you there. The Pleasure Principle. You don't want to miss that. So you go to Substack, substack.com, and you pop in my name, Catherine Hiller, or The Pleasure Principle, and then you'll get like a directory of there'll be a recent post, and then there'll be all the past posts. And, I didn't know how long I could keep this up, but I've been writing once a week for, I don't know, there are 104 posts up there. So there's a lot. If you're interested in pleasure, there's a lot there. And if you're interested in parking, you just wait a couple days and I'll have my Substack on the pleasure of parking. I try to be original. I try to have at least one new thing, either scientific or conceptual, in every piece. Some pieces are, not everything is new, but I make it a vow. One thing will be new in the Pleasure Principle.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us in the rotation. As always, we'd love to have you back anytime, and you've been an amazing guest. Folks, go out there, check out Catherine Hiller on Substack, look her up on social media, follow her, and of course, make sure that you get Just Say Yes, a Marijuana Memoir, and get the 10th anniversary edition with all the new special edition features involved. And with that, Carlos, I think it's time for the normal news. So at the top of the news hour, let's talk about a survey that has been put out by the Center for Disease Control, and that is that smoking remains the most popular method for consuming cannabis. Researchers reviewed more than 138,000 respondents. 15% of those surveyed reported to have consumed cannabis within the past month, while 8% reported daily use. 79% of consumers acknowledged smoking cannabis, while 41% acknowledged consuming edibles. Fewer than 15% of those surveys acknowledged dabbing concentrates, and the findings are consistent with other reporting that most consumers smoke cannabis. Among those who reported dabbing, most respondents were young adults. Among older adults, fewer than 5% of respondents reported engaged in this practice. In recent years, lawmakers in various states have introduced legislation to recriminalize higher THC concentrated products, but most of these efforts have been successful. As always, you can check out more of our news stories on normal.org, and you can learn about the latest in news. Now, look, my computer here is dying. I got a bad battery because it's so old, but if for some reason I cut off, Carlos Garrett, please close us out. But I do want to report that in North Dakota, the governor has signed legislation authorizing patients to obtain cannabis-infused edible products products. Republican Governor Kelly Armstrong has signed legislation into law regulating the manufacturing and dispensing of cannabis-infused edibles to state-qualified patients. House Bill 1203 legalizes patient access to cannabinoid edible products, and the law defines these products as soft or hard lozenges in a geometric square shape with a cannabinoid concentrate or dried leaves or flowers of the plant genus cannabis is incorporated. So that's quite interesting when you hear about packaging. You hear a lot about what about the kids and making things edible that are attractive to folks. Right now, approximately 10,000 North Dakotans are registered state medical marijuana patients, which the voters approved back in 2016. Now, moving on to some other news. Texas, an appellate court has halted the adoption of a city's voter-approved marijuana decriminalization ordinances. This same appellate court has separately ruled against the implementation of Austin's voter marijuana deprioritization initiative, and now they're cracking down on the city of San Marcos, which has a population of over 72,000 people. Voter-initiated ordinance which decriminalizes marijuana. 81% of voters in the city approved the 2022 ordinance, which prohibits local police in most instances from arresting or citing people for a Class A or B marijuana misdemeanor. Voters in several other Texas cities, including Austin and Dallas, have approved similar ordinances. Clearly, the state and the courts are cracking down and fighting against this. So if you have a state where home rule isn't necessarily respected when there is preemption, much like we have in Florida, you got to think about that as you're trying to fight for city decriminalization. Now, I do want to give a shout out to Democratic Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, who has signed Senate Bill 432 into law, which requires state officials to automatically shield from public view records associated with past low-level marijuana convictions. The law stipulates that the Maryland Judiciary Case Search Database may no longer in any way refer to the existence of records of a charge of possession of cannabis in a case with electronic records if the charge resulted in a conviction that was later pardoned by the governor. Last year, Governor Wes Moore signed an executive order that pardoned over 175,000 Maryland residents with misdemeanor marijuana-related convictions. Now, moving on to Arkansas, the governor of Arkansas has vetoed a bill seeking to expand patient ease of access to medical cannabis products. Republican Governor Sarah Sanders, who is a former Trump administration official, vetoed legislation that sought to provide greater ease of access for patients authorized to use medical cannabis. House Bill 1889 authorized deliveries of medical cannabis products by dispensaries via delivery vehicles and via delivery drive-through windows at dispensaries. Only patients who have previously submitted online orders that same day would have been permitted to use the drive-through option. In her veto message, Governor Sanders said that, quote, expanded access to usable marijuana, and therefore she is vetoing the legislation. Plain and simple, this doesn't do anything to increase the number of people using it. It just makes it easier for sick people to get access to it. It's a shame that the governor feels that way. And then, this is important. Coming out of New York, the largest ever meta-analysis says that there still exists strong consensus supporting the therapeutic use of cannabis. This is in a journal, Frontiers in Oncology, has done a meta-analysis of over 10,000 scientific papers, and investigators affiliated with the Chopra Foundation in New York and Whole Health Oncology Institute in Hawaii reviewed data of over 10,641 peer-reviewed studies assessing the efficacy and safety of cannabis for managing cancer-related symptoms. The analysis is the largest ever conducted on the subject of cannabis and cancer management, and they reported across all categories examined, health metrics, treatment, and patient dynamics, there is consistent consensus that supports the potential of medical cannabis. So when you hear politicians and you hear prohibitionists say we need more research, clearly they're full of shit. And so this is a vital thing for folks to pay attention to. Now, there are some other news stories I want to move into, and one of them is a new federally backed marijuana research center has launched. A university that for decades held the monopoly as being the only federal institution authorized to grow marijuana for study purposes has launched a new cannabis research center with the help of a federal grant. University of Mississippi has been selected to house the National Institute of Health's Resource Center for Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research, which was first announced in late 2023. The college will be partnering with Washington State University and the United States Pharmacopoeia with support from a grant awarded by the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health under the National Institute of Health. Ole Miss will lead the efforts for regulatory guidance, while Washington State University will handle research support, and the U.S. Pharmacopoeia will focus on the research standards. I'm very excited to see this because obviously it does indicate a shift in federal research. Obviously, the Schedule 1 status of things still make it difficult, but I do want to read another amazing article, which you can read some of these, and also Marijuana Moment, which produces some great articles, but one that legalizing marijuana has led to an increase in use, but a decrease in problematic misuse, according to the American Medical Association. The new research published by the AMA finds that while the frequency of marijuana users among adults in Canada has increased slightly in the years following nationwide legalization, the problematic misuse of cannabis, in fact, has seen moderate decreases. And this is coming from a report that was published in the JAMA, Journal of American Medicine Association Network Open, which looked at data from over 1,400 adults aged 18 to 65 who completed the assessments every 6 months between September of 2018 and October of 2023. The primary goal of the study was, which was partially funded by federal agencies and Canada's Institute of Health Research, to examine how consumption patterns change following the country's legalization of adult use sales, which in Canada began in October 2018. And researchers wanted to understand whether patterns change based on frequently used cannabis patient, as well as how products preferences have changed. The frequency of marijuana use overall increased slightly, but significantly over the 5-year period among all participants. And of course, people who use cannabis most frequently before legalization saw the largest declines in use. People who consume marijuana on a daily basis prior to legalization decreased their frequency more than those who had used marijuana previously on a weekly basis. So all in all, what we're seeing is that folks are getting access. People are not misusing cannabis when we have safe and legal access. And another report coming out, and again, you can check out Marijuana Moment to hear more on these, is areas with higher veteran populations have more medical marijuana doctors, according to a federally funded study by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so when they examined county level data about medical marijuana patients and clinicians, they focused on 7 U.S. states. And in those states, they found that, of course, that there were more medical marijuana doctors where there were larger veteran populations. This report was published in the American Medical Association Journal Network Open, and it was authored by a 5-person team from the University of Michigan Medical School, the National Center for Injury Prevention, and the Center for Disease Control, and the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education in Tennessee. Research analyzed the data, and they found that across 262 counties across 7 states, Delaware, Maine, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New York, Utah, and West Virginia. So you got a wide swath there of red states, blue states, swing states. And so you can understand a little bit more about what that means. And overall, there was an average of 75 medical cannabis patients per 10,000 residents.
Looks like he's done.
It's kind of like a countdown to see how long it would take for his battery to die there.
Yeah.
But he's bringing up some very interesting points. I think it should also segue into what the heck is going on over here in Tallahassee, as far as on the state level. And I'd like to close this out before we leave. Is we got 2 bills that have survived out of the 20 some odd bills that were put through at the very beginning. Now 555, the House bill, was originally a very much greater expansive bill, which we intended on expanding by adding more things like greater reciprocity and better home grow and things of that sort, which it already had in it. And instead, they took all that out and left us one thing, and that is free cards for vets. And even that is still not quite done. It did pass the House completely, but it never had a Senate bill. So it had to be sent back to the Senate, and it has to go through at least one committee unless they waive the bill, the rules, and they haven't raised the rules yet. So be aware the fact that a lot of times the gamesmanship of the good folks in Tallahassee is to get you to believe that they are on your side. But in the long run, actions speak louder than just words. They might just let that bill die because it's only got 1 week of session left to complete all these things. It still has to hit a committee yet. If it doesn't get through the committee, or if they don't waive the rules, that bill dies. no matter how much enthusiasm it got throughout the session. Now, on the darker side, there's also the hemp bill, which Carlos, I'm sure, has been looking very closely at. And it is actually, once it got to the House, they did have a House bill and a Senate bill, which were somewhat wide apart. But they did manage to get through over the expanse of time. In fact, it actually had more traction than any other bill, which shows you that somebody paid a lot of money to get it to go through. That's the way it works in Tallahassee. And the good folks who have this hemp shops and the smoke shops have been fighting against it. I certainly hope they don't spend all their money on the consultants that are dying to take their money to give out money to for a veto, which may or may not last. Because there's a fight right now going on between Tallahassee and our governor, between the legislature and our governor. And our governor did a little oopsie and used money that was supposed to go towards a Medicaid repayment for overpayment and laundered it through two agencies to put into the anti-Amendment 3 campaign and Amendment 4 campaigns. He's not supposed to use public money, so instead he just laundered money that was supposed to go to the coffers. So we'll see how that goes. This bill, the hemp bill, it was supposed to be presented on Friday. Instead, they what is called TP'd it or temporarily postponed it. And it was put back on second reading, which means that it can call it up at any time during the next week. If it doesn't get called up, it dies. So stay tuned, grab your popcorn. If you want, have some infused popcorn. It makes the movie that much better. Isn't that right, Carlos?
Right.
So take us home.
Bye, everybody. I ain't got shit to say. I'm just tired of Florida politics. We got 1 week left. Fucking sick of it.
I know it was nice to have somebody who wasn't politics today, right?
Yeah, it was all right. I mean, I'm looking. I should read that book. I'm looking forward to reading the book actually. But yeah, it's political time right now. We need to be in the thick of it.
I was going to throw this out during the show. Maybe you could cut this out later on in editing. But I do think that one party reads more than the other, at least in regards to actual pulp, reading, not just looking for things thrown at them on Instagram or X.
Let me guess, it's not the party that bans books.
Yeah, I think you're getting along the same line right there. The folks
see.
who do most of the reading online versus reading actual books, yeah, they're the ones who seem to be often in charge.
So you heard it here first, guys. If you're here in Florida, read Catherine Hiller's book before it gets banned.
There you go.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.